David, I want to get right to it. Every question is precious as well. What is the next step for the World Bank? I think our audience worldwide understands Chairman Powell's mission. They understand what the IMF will need to do with beleaguered countries. What's your first order mission at the World Bank?
Hello, Tom. Good to see you. The first order was to set up healthcare programs for the emergency, and we managed to get 100 countries that have arrangements with the World Bank that provide things like personal protective equipment into their hospitals and so on. So that's been good. And now the next step is to help the countries get ready for a recovery when it happens. And we're specifically thinking or working from a focus that they need to have more transparency in their debt. They need to work on the fuel subsidies. You know, with oil prices down, it's a lot less critical to the people of the country to have the government keep subsidizing gasoline. So that's something that they can work on. And then social protection. That means a safety net for the poor. Right. But what we are trying to do is get cash to people, actual cash to people, rather than funneling it only to the government entities.
David, the medical professionals that we've spoken to at Bloomberg make very clear that the third world countries, the World Bank countries, if you will, are really fragile, and particularly fragile in their medical infrastructure. The World Bank has to provide leadership there. What is your action plan to improve their ability to respond to this virus?
Yeah, this is a big challenge. It's a deep recession, and it's due as with the advanced countries shut down, the poor countries don't have markets. They don't have remittances. That's very important because they've been used to getting money from people sending money back home. So what we're trying to do is strengthen the healthcare systems themselves, and so that's different in each country. Some countries need more hospital beds. Some countries need more equipment. And so that's exactly what we're trying to do. And as I said, 100 programs in just a month is a very impressive, and people worked really hard over the last month, both in countries. The World Bank has offices in a lot of the countries. They had to connect up, often by video conference, with government officials in order to get the list of things that were needed in the country. And so that's all going on. And we're also trying to do bulk purchasing or group purchasing and advanced purchasing in order to help groups of countries at the same time.
David, I've mentioned at the beginning, we have two presidents of the World Bank, back-to-back scientists, and Dr. Kim, and of course your work in physics at Colorado College. We have a president of the United States who some would suggest anti-science. He's recently gone after the World Health Organization as well. I want you to speak now of the institutional integrity of the World Bank, like the WHO, and I want you to speak to Americans who would suggest the integrity of the World Bank is not there to distribute the money, to distribute the funds. How will you spend the money, the millions and billions of dollars, over the coming months?
Well, Tom, that's a hard question. It's valid to ask, and it's valid to ask the World Bank to defend that. So the governance structures are pretty strong. So as countries ask for a loan for a given area or a grant, the World Bank makes both loans and grants, then we can look at the system that the country is proposing to use to monitor that. And so my sense is there's pretty good, or there is very good integrity of the flow of money from the World Bank. It gets hard, there's so many of the international organizations around the world. It's hard to generalize into those, but for the World Bank, we have a system where we're looking hard at what we want to achieve in the country, what the country can actually do, and then the integrity of the flow of money. I mentioned the importance of getting cash to actual people in the countries. I think most Americans would support that idea. If you can have some confidence that money is going into people in poor countries, then we're a generous, the U.S. is
Well,
a generous country, and that shows up.
David, I'm so glad you brought that up, and I saw that famous Malpass word fast in your personal report on remittances the other day. This has been a great surprise, and I think for our viewers and listeners across America, it's shocking the amount of money that is remitted across the World Bank world. Explain to us the dearth of remittances right now and what that means to these poorer countries.
I'm so glad you raised that. So, as in poor countries, they often and almost always want to work, want to find jobs, want to do things useful, and sometimes they cross borders to do it. But then they're generous. As soon as they have a job, often they're finding ways to send money back to their family. And the problem now is multiple. One is that the people have lost their jobs in the advanced economies. And so you see that in both the US, in Europe, and that's hurting the ability of people to send money home. But then there's also the problem of the systems are breaking down, some of the banking systems and the ability of the transfer agents to actually connect. So the World Bank is very involved in that. And also, one of the things I've been pushing is the importance of digital financial services. Actually, if you can show to workers that their money gets to their family back home, they're even more generous, and they're working harder, sending more money home. That might be in Western Europe, sending it into Eastern Europe, or sending it into North Africa. All of those are very valuable for the poor. For the poor that are left back home.
David, in the time that we have left, I want to speak of the uproar as the president selected a new World Bank leader. And of course, you were caught in the crosshairs of that. What's been your biggest surprise at the World Bank? The picture was painted of a huge bureaucracy, lots of wasted money. It would be opaque, and Mr. Malpass wouldn't be able to get anything done. What's been the biggest surprise for David Malpass of entering the doors of the World Bank?
I've been happy with my ability to work with personnel system within the World Bank and we have very strong people in spots. There's been turnover. You know, Kristalina Georgieva became the managing director of the IMF, and so that created, she was number 2 at the World Bank. That created a hole, but we filled it. We were able to fill it quickly. So I guess the biggest surprise, Tom, is that the challenge is actually with the countries themselves. What I've asked us to do at the World Bank is work very closely with the client countries on programs that will actually raise median incomes and address poverty in those countries. And that turns out to be the hardest part of the job. Vested interests are a big challenge in much of the world, where they want to keep the money for people that already have quite a bit of money. And what I'm trying to do is get the median income to rise for these countries.
In this crisis, David, will you have to go out and find new funds? And what would you say to the American public skeptical of donating further to the World Bank?
The American public has been incredibly generous around the world. You know, you hear a lot of negativity in the U.S. about but the reality of the world is the U.S. is a strong leader in the world and a strong leader in the World Bank. It's the biggest shareholder, a very big donor into the World Bank, and that is passed on in terms of usable funds abroad. So I guess what I would say to people is be clear in the national interest, whether you're in the U.S., whether you're in Japan, whether you're in Europe. What's the national interest? And then find organizations that are effective in order to channel that interest. And it works. The World Bank is able to work across it's really 150 countries in order to have an impact on on better programs, less poverty, clean water, electricity, better infrastructure systems, better climate, better environment, all of the things that are needed. So it's working well enough. It just means that there's lots of work, lots of steps needed, and especially now with a global recession.